bonus episode, bonus episode. I wish I knew how to quit you. Well, why don't you? Why don't you? Codependent content. Okay. And that's it. That's the introduction to this bonus episode. Because I don't have a different introduction.
I think you nailed it. I think that's the official one.
I probably could have committed more on my end, but that's what it is. Shannon,
hey,
we're in a different space.
What
today? What's going on?
Where are we? Where am I? What universe is this?
Yeah. Okay. I thought you were gonna actually answer, but I guess I'll answer. So we're in the living room. We just can yes and I decided that we're gonna do a bonus episode, and I thought it would be nice to do a little bit of a scenery change and bring us into a different location for the bonus episode, just to set it apart. And I thought it would be super easy and not hard at all. But it turns out it was much more difficult to set up than I thought it would be.
Well, it looks great. I'm pretty cozy. I think we should move it down here.
It was a good testing ground. We got our logo in the back as provided by our projector, and we got 3 lights going, and we're just trying to, just be a little bit more comfortable, a little more cozy for this bonus episode. Shannon, this is our first bonus episode.
It is.
We've never done a bonus episode before. What is a bonus episode of a Codependent Content podcast?
It's an even deeper dive into our thoughts and feelings. So Mattias told me that he was really activated about some of the points we discussed in our podcast, but didn't really get to elaborate on. And upon further consideration, we were like, we have more to say. We have some feelings we want to talk about. So here we are.
Yes. So we, as she said, we recently did a podcast about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. The sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. And afterwards, we wanted to have a little bit more of a discussion. So a bonus episode, this is our first time doing it. The structure is a little bit different. We're just going to kind of jump right into it. So, this is a little bit of your spoiler warning. You don't have to have listened to our previous discussion in order to enjoy the bonus episode. That said, we are going to be bouncing off of a few minor plot spoilers of Across the Spider-Verse. So if you haven't seen the movie, technically you might get spoiled a little bit. So I would still suggest having seen the movie before jumping into this discussion. That said, as a bonus episode, we're not exactly discussing Across the Spider-Verse. We're just using that as like a jumping off point to talk about other things. So this might be a little bit more defined, or a little bit more focused of a conversation, but also a little bit more loose, because we're not really here to talk about the movie or to, I guess, review it in that sense,
right.
Things like that. So, but definitely go listen to that, because we really enjoyed the movie and we want more people to watch it. It seems like our, every time we stop doing a series and we do a movie, there's a big drop off on people who have listened to the podcast.
Yeah.
Mostly because people are not as up to date on movies because you have to go to the movie theater to go do it. So that makes sense a little bit.
Yeah.
And then all those people who were like, oh, I was here for this content. We have to rebuild an audience every time.
Right.
That said, thank you so much for those who have listened to it and who have commented and who are jumping in on the discussion. We're so happy to have you diehards out there. You Cocoa heads. What are we talking?
Oh boy. No, we're going to have to workshop that one.
Okay. I pitched it. Y'all guys figure it out. And we're glad you're listening and you're around. And so, super thankful for that. And if we have to rebuild an audience every time, that's perfectly fine. That's, as we mentioned, we're going to go into Star Trek, and I feel like going to be a whole different audience from the Yellow Jackets crowd.
For sure.
So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
What are we anyway? So yeah, bonus episode. We're just hanging out. We're just being chill. We're doing whatever. Anything else you want to say before we kind of get started?
Coco heads maybe think of Coco Melon, the kids show.
Sure.
That's just what's on my mind right now. So that should be the Spotify poll this week. So what should we call people that like our podcast?
Maybe I think it's a little too early to give our audience a nickname. So it's fine if we don't.
Well, I don't. I'm one of those people I'm like, should we be thinking about this now? And you're no.
But is it like one of those things where like when you give yourself a nickname and you're trying to make it like a thing, like we want it to just come about organically, right?
Naturally.
We don't want to like force a nickname. Did you have a nickname that you gave yourself?
I tried to get people to start. So Shannon, I don't think is a nicknameable name. I don't have a nickname. People just call me Shannon. But for a while,
are you mistaking like shortening of a name with a nickname? Because that's not what I'm.
No, I just said I don't have a nickname. People only call me Shannon.
Sure. Okay.
And for a while, I was like, well, maybe my nickname can be Noah because I know a lot. And it was like a whole thing because the letters are also still in like my name.
Wow.
And I thought I know, it was like second grade, guys.
Were you like a know-it-all?
I was very much like the kid that sat in the front row, like aced every test. People would cheat off my homework. So I was like, oh, maybe you guys can like call me Noah.
The kind of person that would grow up to have a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Noah.
Fuck you.
And
Fuck you.
My nickname that I tried to get started happened around high school. And well, for a while I tried to get Mad Hatter going and that never happened.
That's cool.
But my name's Mattias and no one can ever pronounce it. So that I get like a lot of different names that people call me just like around my name, and then I was really into like writing and I found a synonym once and I was like, oh, Maverick, that's cool. And I tried to make that my thing. So that was like anytime I would play, I guess Halo back in the day, LAN parties, my name would be Maverick, or a shortened version of that. And then my email is still maverick.marisegan@gmail.com. That's one of them.
I have often wondered what that meant.
And that was always a thing. And what's funny is like I had not seen Top Gun at that point in my career. I guess I was 15, 14 whenever I came up with that. And I did end up joining the Navy. And my original goal was to be in aviation. I still worked in aviation, but I couldn't be a pilot. That would have just been a career that I didn't want to pursue. And it would have been hard to get qualified considering I'm a little bit colorblind. So it's a tough situation. You got to have like perfect vision and stuff. It's not impossible, but there's certain, you really have to prove yourself. And I was like, I'm just here to get my college money. So that was really what it was about.
Right.
But that was before I saw Top Gun. And then I realized Maverick was, and then I felt really, really as a person in the Navy trying to be Maverick. Like I even got like patches made for Maverick for like my name patch or whatever and stuff. And, to put on like my luggage or whatever. And I still have them.
Yeah.
But I still felt like pretty basic considering.
Well, that's hilarious because that's 100% what I thought it was. So Maverick's a synonym for what?
It's like rebel nonconformist. And we talked about last week how like Hobie could have been like, I would have latched onto everything Hobie is, which
right.
Seems like the internet is just doing that, right? Hobie's everyone's favorite character. So again, pretty basic, but I was very specific about being like a nonconformist in everything I did. I was like, oh, if you do it like this, I'm going to find a way to do it differently, right? I found ways to like wear clothes differently. I tried to always find a thing that made me stand out or whatever, So I was kind of like a rebel punk in that sense, Some of the things people, I guess, took notice of and some of the other things were just stupid teenage, trying to be what I'm saying? Yeah. Rebellious and stuff. And so when I saw like nonconformist, I was like, that speaks to me. I'm like, I'm kind of a maverick,
Yeah.
When you're new to things and and a word hits you like, and you take it on as like your identity or whatever. Like at that age, I was like, yeah, that's what I am. Like no one knows what a maverick is, but I'm a maverick, and of course everyone knows. It's not like but I discovered it for myself,
right? And that's very important. But I see that so much in you now that I know the story behind that. It's like you've got Royal Misfit, you've got Maverick, you've got the Vulgarian Order. Like you're so much about like uniqueness and difference, but finding community in it and like having it being celebrated. That seems to be your like energy. So
it did kind of catch on in my like I said, LAN party spaces.
Sure.
So like I still have a few people that would call me Maverick from that time, you know, in terms of like when we were playing a game. Because, you know, when you're getting shot in the head by me all the time and it says you killed by Maverick, you know, you're gonna start, you know, recognizing that.
Remember the name. Fame.
There it is. So that's a little tangent about nicknames for all. So what nickname do you guys want is basically what that was about. So yeah. Are you ready to talk about this thing? We kind of want this to be semi-short episode, I think, but we'll go into it. Also, I should mention, I'm probably not going to edit this at all. I'm just going to
throw it out,
put it in the thing, export it, throw it online, maybe put a little thumbnail. I don't know. This is going to be, you're getting the raw discussion. So if that's all, everything you guys wanted, well, here you are.
Here we go.
Again, I'm just thinking about like how great.
What?
The computer's over there. I had to bring my computer down. I could have done this online. I made this so much more harder than it needed to be. For this,
another
like,
trend of Maverick.
Just had to do that.
Just being as complicated, but as thorough as possible.
So yeah, so we wanted to talk about, well, I wanted to talk about, so this will be honest, I am forcing you to do this bonus episode.
Not forcing, but definitely you were activated by the topic we're going to discuss. And I like that. It got me activated and I'm ready to hear your thoughts further.
So we talked a little bit about the idea of canon events and how it relates to Miguel, right? Mm-hmm. It's very easy to look at the movie of Across the Spider-Verse and understand canon events and see on the surface what it is. To have a canon event in terms of like a superhero character, you know, and how to overcome that. And it makes sense, again, on the surface level in terms of like what Miles is dealing with. The whole thing comes around to he wants to do his own thing. He doesn't want to conform to the canon events of everyone else. But in discussing it, I feel like the layers of a canon event goes so much deeper into things that we can experience or talk about and even just recognize in our normal lives and every day. Like it's not just about superheroes and their canon. It's not just about Spider-Man and his canon event and Miles and what his canon events have to be. It's about what does canon event mean to like everyone else. And for Miguel specifically, it's real easy to transpose Miguel as on a surface level as a fan who's rebelling against what can be done with a character. We talked about that on the review in the episode, and the directors say very much that as a part of Miguel's character. He is this is a response to the backlash that Miles Morales received whenever he was first conceived, right? This is about a fan, as an antagonist, going against what you're allowed to do with a character, right? And then I started thinking about it more, and I wrote a whole essay about this, and it's very personal to me because it's coming from a perspective of me wanting to write a book, wanting to write characters, wanting to, I guess, create, quote unquote, my own canon, but also not really understanding what the canon is, right? And then the idea of like being a writer who wants to bring something out of nothing, and then how do you determine like what is the truth, you know? And I love that idea, and I love how, in essence, that Miguel can be a surrogate for the writer, not only as a writer just trying to create something out of nothing, but also as the director or the writers who wrote the movie and what they're allowed to do with the character, right? And the idea that like it makes sense when you look at Miguel's, like it's not, we can easily be like, yeah, you're the antagonist, you're the evil one, this is toxic fandom, you know? But it's not just toxic fandom. It's the struggle that writers are having. It's the struggle that people who get handed a franchise, like what are they allowed to do? Like he's Miguel who tried to do something. You could say, you know, Miguel's a writer who tried to create a new story with an existing character and then failed, you know, and then there was backlash from it, you know, and now he's realizing I can't do that anymore. Now I have to go and rewrite everything and try and do it. And I promise to the fans that I'm going to stick to it. You know, we're going to stay close to the comics, right? And that happens a lot in Hollywood. Every time there's like a new reboot, it's like, hey, this one's going to stick closely to the source material, and everyone cheers because they're like, yeah, that last one kind of sucked because you decided to change this person and change that. And then, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like it clearly can be like Miguel is a stand-in for the writer, and that's not necessarily an antagonist, you know, that's someone that you can actually empathize with.
Sure.
You know, it's like, so it's not as clear cut as like, oh, here's the bad guy, you know? So I just found that really interesting. I did write an article about it, and you can go read that. There's going to be a link in the description below. So I don't want to rehash everything there. But yeah, I'm just curious, before we move on and talk more about it, like if that speaks to anything that you are going through,
a little bit. I know this is not a Spider-Man review, but even meeting Miguel, it's clear that he's an antagonist to what our main character wants, but I never thought that he was a bad, like cruel or malicious entity.
Right.
So to understand, like, under the concept that you just brought up, like fans are usually excited when people come out and say this is going to stick close to the source material. For example, The Last of Us.
Sure.
They stuck so closely to what the video game gave us because it worked, and it thrilled me. I wanted to see basically a beat for beat adaptation, and the little parts that they strayed away from it, the risks that they took, even just introducing like episode 3, I think is important because it shows you how you can push back authentically against your canon and still find success. I don't mean that it was superfluous, but it wasn't in the original source material. They added it, and it shows you that there is room for freedom, but I think it's like if it's done the right way, quote unquote.
And there was a little bit of backlash, wasn't there?
Was there?
Well, I guess you don't pay attention, but there's definitely people out there that were against the change who didn't recognize that this was a part of Bill's story. They always saw when Bill, and again, spoilers for The Last of Us, this is episode 3, which is the Bill and Frank episode. And if you've seen the show, you know what we're talking about. But in the video game, Frank never is a non-character. Frank is a person that has a death off screen, and we only hear about him through Bill. And Bill always says things like, my partner, he was my partner. And that's it. It's never outright like he was my lover. He was, you know what I'm saying? Like partner is like implied, but also people took it as they were working buddies.
Right.
You know, they were people who were surviving the apocalypse together. And people didn't recognize that there was a clear indication, even down to like the magazine that Ellie's reading in the car afterwards that she stole from his stash, that it's a gay porno magazine, that no, partner was implying more than just working buddies.
Yeah.
But people didn't recognize that. And so the Bill and Frank episode comes out, beautiful episode, a great way to stray from the quote unquote canon, but still stays close to the material that people still backlashed against. Maybe not a whole lot of people. It was still a critically acclaimed episode.
Yeah, not in the same way that I would say like fans were weird about a black Spider-Man, right? Right. So yeah, I mean, you're always going to have people that are like, oh, I don't like this. But I think I was more trying to speak to the fact that I think it's the integrity that you treat the source material. The reason that we love canon so much is because it's familiar and we love the story. We love the journey that the character goes on. So when you break that or push against it, it almost feels like you're dishonoring or like not giving all the weight that you should to what the character's gone through. Even if I don't 100% agree with that. I just think maybe that's how it can be perceived. It's like you're not taking any of this seriously. You've decided that what you think should happen is more important.
Well, much of our discussion was taken up by what changed and what didn't change, you know, from the source material to the show, you know, and some of the things we liked and some of the things we didn't like, you know, and it is, I guess, just goes to show like how much you're battling, even with people who love the source material, who love the adaptation, like us, who really, really enjoyed the show and what they changed and what they did with it. You're still battling as a creator the fact that like anything you do is going to be scrutinized in terms of like, was this a good change? Was this not a good change? You know, Last of Us is interesting because they still hit certain beats that they were like, well, this has, you know, they were very much like, well, the canon's there, like we have to hit this certain beat,
right?
You know, so it's there are specific things that still don't change, and the other things that do change sometimes, they're still hitting the same thing just in a different way, you know? So it's I don't think they're doing like overly too much with the canon,
right?
You know, in that sense, they're not changing a whole lot, you know? But I do think there's a lot of people out there who did not like the second game and who are probably almost asking for canon to be changed, you know, which is a really interesting thing because they were like, oh, this is a chance to right the wrongs of the source material, you know? And now how closely do you stick with canon? Because again, if you're a supporter of the second game, you're not going to change things, you know? You're going to be like, I want things to stay the same, but you also like, where do you, that's an interesting experiment altogether, and a franchise, you know, which I think is also just very different from, you know, the canon events we're talking about in like Spiderman, you know, when say this was a bad movie, but the recent Fantastic Four reboot cast Michael B. Jordan as the Human Torch, and you know, that character is always white. The whole Fantastic Four team is like always white, you know, and so people backlash against that.
Well, something that makes me think of two different veins. So let me just pick one. When we say characters are canonically white, yes, because yes, a character has been canonically white, but if we look into history, like of course they're canonically white because that's what we were. We were like a white-centric society that was like, women don't get a vote, Black people don't get a vote, like immigrants don't matter. Those are not my point of views, but of course, so media is going to center around people that are creating the media, which was essentially white cis men. So to push back and say, oh, this character that was created in the 50s is white and always has to be white. It's like, no, that character is of the time. And do we love the character? Because we can still experience all of these emotional beats and all of this like beautiful story, regardless of whether they're canonically white or not. So I think that's an interesting concept too, if we're going to push against that. And I think there is a difference if like a character is canonically Black and then we change that. I think that has different meaning. But to just take like a wide history of white characters and then start pushing back when we start giving other people representation in these stories, I think speaks more to like the emotional capacity of the fandom and the forward thinking and the momentum of like writers and creators who want to start giving other stories a possibility to shine.
I will say that like there's definitely better examples out there. I think that when it comes to casting different races for different people, that has become such a norm now that we kind of recognize that they might change. Any of those things can change at any point, right? Fan castings usually start including now, where it used to be like who looked the most like the person. Now it's like people are like, well, who embodies this character more? Energy. And then you see that kind of happening more and more. So it's a little bit more accepted, at least in terms of casting different races than it used to be. Even though it is interesting to note that, again, Miles was created because of backlash for having a black Spider-Man, you know? So that's very, very important. And what's also interesting is like, I brought this up to you before, is these same fans probably don't backlash against, well, they did, but then it was like quickly accepted. There was like, when Hugh Jackman, a song and dance guy, was cast as Wolverine, at first, there was a little bit of like, oh, he should be shorter, you know, and Hugh Jackman is not short, but Wolverine is canonically the shortest guy on the team, you know, and then he went on and played the character for like 20 years or whatever. So no one gave a crap because he did such a good job, you know? And so there's still these like initial things and knee-jerk reactions that happen to wanting to change any sort of canon or things like that.
Right.
But then usually result in the best storylines, right? Or I think there's I don't know comics, but like Batman, his canon is always that his parents die, right? They get shot in front of him, and that's what turns him to going to be the Batman, you know? And there's a canonical change in one of them where Thomas Wayne is the one that survives and he becomes a Batman, you know? I guess you could argue, again, we're talking about universes and multiverses and things like that. Is it canon? Can you really call it canon? You know what I'm saying? Like it's such an interesting thing, but that is also, people have been clamoring to see if like a Thomas Wayne, like people thought Michael Keaton in the new Flash movie, I still don't know if this is true or not. They thought that he might be playing the Thomas Wayne version. You know, there was a Jeffrey Dean Morgan was cast as Thomas Wayne in the Zack Snyder universe. And since then people have been clamoring for a Thomas Wayne version of the Batman for absolutely no reason, you know, but this is something that breaks the canon. You're asking for something that is very specifically like was not part of Batman, but you want it, you know? So when are you allowed to, when are you not kind of situation of the argument, you know? And so
something we say about Spider-Man a lot is, you know, how many times are we going to watch respectfully, like the same thing over and over again? How many times are we going to reboot the exact same story? So even from a creative standpoint, like it's more beneficial to you as a creator and as a consumer to open up the world to different possibilities. Because if you, like, the reason we like characters is because we like the journey that they take. Like it makes us feel something in some capacity. So whether you were an Iron Man fan or a Captain America fan, it's because you like stood for whatever value or energy those characters brought. It's not because it was Robert Downey Jr. or because it was Chris Evans. And if it was anyone else, you wouldn't still be that team. It's like you connect with energy. So if you just fall in love with the story, there should be so much space there to explore that story in different capacities as we as a society grow and learn and change. Because I'm going to be an 80-year-old woman watching the exact same reboot that I'm like, oh, I remember when they did that with Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield and like 200 other white men with brown hair. Like that's just, you just get stuck in a rut then.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of the other thing that I wanted to bring up, which is the idea of Canon Events being a kind of a stand-in for the things that we feel like we have to go through versus our children, right? Because as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that there are people, especially like when you came out of this movie, you're like, I think I'm a Spider-Man fan, you know? And I was like, well, be careful because there's, as the movie shows you, there's like Spider-Man it seems like you're a Miles Morales Spider-Man fan, you know, which is not a bad thing to say. But it is kind of, how should I put this? I can see where people like can get really bent out of shape if you're not like, because you don't have the whole history. You don't have the whole, you didn't go through the entire journey of Spider-Man to really be a Spider-Man fan, which is not what I'm saying, but you know.
And I want to clarify that again, just to make sure. What you're saying is that there are people who think that because I haven't grown up watching all the iterations of Spider-Man and I came in and just became a Miles Morales fan, that I don't even get to claim the moniker of Spider-Man fan because I'm not a real fan. And that is not what Mattias is calling me. That's just the concept of what we're discussing.
No, and I think that's the concept of the movie, right? Because there are going to be kids that are going to this film who are going to be just like you and be like, I want to be Spider-Man, you know? And then the parent is going to be a person that's going to like, well, which Spider-Man? Or like, oh, so Peter Parker, you know what I'm saying? Or not know. And they're going to try and educate their person. You know what I'm saying? Like for the longest time, Star Wars is another example. The people who grew up with the 1970s Star Wars, and then the prequels came out, and it was hard to kind of like, you were forced to figure out how do you introduce your kids to Star Wars, you know, and because those people who grew up in the 70s now have children, they want to introduce their kids to Star Wars. Do you start with the old ones and then go to the new ones, or do it chronologically? And then the machete cut came out. We talked about that, and like it becomes an ongoing discussion. And now with the sequels and with the spin-offs and all those different things, it's becoming more and more like who claims the quote unquote canon, right? The people who grew up with the prequels now appreciate the prequels, whereas the people who grew up with the originals like hated the prequels, right? You know, whereas when I was 10 or 12, I loved the prequels for what they were, you know, and I still look at them and I'm still unsure of like what exactly the critical response. Like I didn't have a problem with the dialogue as much as other people did. I never hated on George Lucas, but it was because of all that hate that he decided to not make his own thing anymore and to sell it off to Disney. And then Disney brought about the sequels, and then people backlashed against that because like it's not canon. And then they did the thing when they bought Lucasfilm where they erased all canon in terms of the books, what we now know as legends, right? And people were up in arms about that, right? And what's interesting is like those things, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's like those things get erased, but they're not, but they don't, you know? Right. They get told they're like not canon or whatever, but it's not erasure. It still exists. You can still have it, you know? People can still enjoy those things. And it was their fault in the first place that the canon was, the fans, the fans' fault because they're the ones that pushed George Lucas to do this thing. So there's a whole lot of stuff just in Star Wars in terms of what we talk about with like canon and things, right? And to get back to my point, when kids grow up with the new sequels or Star Wars or whatever, like you're like, my favorite one is Rogue One because that was the one that you were introduced to first, I think. No. No. Okay. Nope. I mean, we'll retcon that. But there's people that would. Absolutely. Yeah. So each generation kind of gets their introduction. Sure. So I'm going to partner this with Star Trek because I grew up a Trekkie and a Star Wars fan. But every time a new Star Trek comes out, you are engaging with a new audience that's going to view media in their present day view. So for someone like my mom, who's a huge Trekkie, grew up with the original series, she goes to see this new thing and she's like, oh, it doesn't feel like the original. It doesn't feel like what I saw when I fell in love with it. And that has to be okay because for someone like Mattias, who watched Strange New Worlds as basically one of his first introductions to like a Star Wars series, Star Trek series, you got to fall in love with what Star Trek is for the first time. And it's okay that your experience is different than my mom's in the 60s because,
you're still being introduced to what I keep saying, which is like the energy and the love for what the story is, regardless of where your jumping off point is. So for Star Wars, for me, my parents were fans in the 70s. So I watched the original 3 before seeing the prequel 3, even though I was young enough that the prequel was my generation's jumping in point to Star Wars.
Sure.
Which I think is interesting. But this concept of like, you can't be a true, real fan because you're not seeing the true, real first thing that came out. It's like, of course it's like the first book of a series. Like, you honor the first thing because it brings about this energy that people connect to. And then you get to explore that for as long as you want to with as many people who can engage with it as possible. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I don't think it makes people who saw Rogue One and fell in love with it any less of a Star Wars fan than people who grew up in the 70s, like losing their shit over a
here's a
movie.
question.
Yeah?
And I don't know anything about canon. That's the thing about my Star Trek experience. Like, I still don't know the like Kirk canon, so I always have to ask you, what is the actual, the story or the history behind things. What is considered the worst Star Trek in your view? Or in just in general?
I think generally people seem to not like the 2003 reboot Enterprise.
Right. So what if just curious, like if my introduction to Star Trek was Enterprise, I'd never seen any other Star Trek. But then I said, but that's my favorite one. That's the best Star Trek.
So here's my thing though. I liked Enterprise.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying, though.
Of course. And it is, so the problem with Enterprise is that it's closer to like you and I.
Okay, name something that's the worst for you then.
No, I like them all. I understand, just make your point, because I understand what you're trying to say. But even like, there's still merit.
It's real easy in this conversation. It's real easy to accept new canon when it's good, right? We both agree that Strange New Worlds is a good Star Wars, or Star Trek, right? And then maybe some people are disliking Picard right now. There's a lot of people that are like, Picard, like the new season's like interesting, or Discovery or whatever, so it's easy to be like, well, that's not canon,
right.
And that's not true. Right?
Right.
It is still canon. It still exists. And people are still trying to do new things. And there are people that get something out of it.
Yeah.
And you do not have to enjoy it. Right? Like, you don't have to. There's a difference between accepting it, and just it not being for you.
Right.
Like the backlash to Miles Morales was just racial and hateful and just downright toxic. And people, or I should say, not even before Miles Morales, just the fact that Donald Glover wanted to be Peter Parker. The people that were being very toxic. And this could be a minority, but as we've seen in recent years, a minority is sometimes a lot bigger than we recall, or that we think that they are, and they can be very, very influential in their rhetoric and how they speak and their agendas and things like that. And so even before Miles Morales was created, and just the thought of having a black Spider-Man got people so riled up, that is very different from like me going and watching like a version of Miles Morales, like the kids show that I'm like, it's not made for me because I'm an adult, or whatever,
Yes.
it's like I can still accept it and allow people to have that thing, for it to be their original thing, without telling them that they're not valid, or telling them that it doesn't exist, or telling them that it shouldn't, like, that's not real, or you're not a real fan, or things like that, like that is, I love The Last Jedi. Again, I keep bringing it back to Star Wars, right? And I think that is one of the better Star Wars films, not only because Rian Johnson is my favorite director, but like it was just the more and more you revisit it and think about it, like the more think pieces I read about it, the more and more I just love that movie. I hated the Rise of Skywalker, you know, but there are a lot of people that loved the Rise of Skywalker. I haven't met anyone, but there are definitely people that enjoyed that last movie. I can just personally, but I still have to accept that it's canon, you know, that it's there, right? And I can never watch it again,
right?
You know, and I don't hate anyone who loves it. If they really, really enjoy it, anytime they tell me what they loved about it, I'm like, yeah, that was a great moment. Like I do understand that, you know, I understand where they're coming from, right? And I don't know. We can't be erasing things, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, you can go write your own story, you know? You can go write your own thing. This is why fan fiction was created, right?
Right.
That's another thing I bring up in the article was how I started writing, and then I think a lot of other people writing, and I even saw a tweet on this after they saw Across the Spider-Verse. They're like, there you go, all you fanfic writers, your fan fiction is now valid. You know? No one, and as we're seeing in like Star Wars universe, they're not trying to also erase the canon of things, right? When it comes to Legends, there are people there that like enjoy certain characters that you also enjoyed, and they enjoyed storylines that you enjoyed, and they're just trying to make it make sense. They're bringing it slowly back in a way that just kind of like tells a kind of cohesive story, but that doesn't mean it like if you don't like it, then you can, I don't know, I guess engage with it differently. I don't know. You're just looking at me. I don't really know.
Well, you're just saying like the exact same thing that I said, which is,
oh, I'm sorry for.
No, I like that you're elaborating. That's why I'm just looking at you, because like you're saying what I just said. I agree with it completely. We don't need to be dicks to people who have a different entry point into fandoms than we do. I don't understand why people try to gatekeep stories, because again, if you fall in love with characters, fine. I don't like Star Trek Discovery, so I don't watch it. I don't like it. It's not for me. Yeah. It's still part of the universe. It's great. People that love it, great. Yeah. Not my thing. And that has to be okay. And something I was thinking about, like Harry Potter was one of like my first fandoms.
Sure, yeah.
So when they reboot Harry Potter, and I know there's a whole lot of nonsense with that, but when they reboot it, and if they made Hermione different and decided that Ron was going to be a girl,
I guarantee there's going to be a black Hermione,
and that's great. And if they made Harry Potter non-binary and a different race, and like great, because guess what? It's still a story. I still fell in love with someone who came to a place looking for community and family, and it doesn't matter the gender or age. Well, age is kind of important because it's a like growing up story, but it doesn't matter. All the other things are superfluous as long as like the traits and the energy that I love are still there, then it's still important. And if Daniel Radcliffe is going to be my Harry Potter, great. And if my kids get to meet a different Harry Potter that maybe is more inclusive or more indicative of the time that they're living in, I think that's just as special and just as important.
Yeah, this can go like so many different ways. First off, do you think Jude Law will reprise his role as Dumbledore, as sexy Dumbledore, but a little bit older because obviously,
right. Sexy Dumbledore.
Just do some makeup on him. He could.
You know what? I'm down.
Sexy gay Dumbledore.
Sexy gay Dumbledore.
That's interesting because in this discussion of like canon events, we're also talking about like reboots and every time there's like a new reboot, there's like a new discussion of what do you include, what do you not include, what do you change for it, you know? And that's where we get like these idea of like multiverses. It works really, really well in this thing where it's like it validates everything, but there's plenty of franchises and things out there that don't have multiverse story. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not really, they don't all coexist. They literally are, it's this one or it's that one, you know? And the Harry Potter's a good example, because once they reboot it, assuming they're going to move ahead with it, with writer strike stuff and everything, you know, even like Lord of the Rings, like there's things that like the new Rings of Power is technically supposed to tie into, and it takes place long enough where it wouldn't conflict with
the Fellowship.
Or the movies by Peter Jackson, but it is an adaptation. Every time we have a new adaptation, these things are technically they don't live in the same universe, and you have the ability to change and do whatever. And for years we've gone on and been like, what is a good adaptation? Like which one do we kind of accept and don't accept? And we just don't do that the same way with like comic books. You know, you're allowed to like be like, well, I didn't like that one, but I love this version of it, you know, or whatever. And they can both exist and not necessarily conflict with each other at all, or conflict with your experience. You know, Wizard of Oz was a remake. People forget, you know,
what?
The Wizard of Oz
was a remake?
Was a remake. Yeah. Was a reboot or whatever. I mean, before remakes and reboots, that was, I guess that's a loose term, considering Gone with the Wind also was like, I believe there's an older version of Gone with the Wind. I might also be conflating the two, but I'm pretty sure there's an old black and white version of Gone with the Wind, an old black and white version of Wizard of Oz, I believe. And, you know, that was back silent film era kind of things where we were just making everything, and you could just remake or do whatever and do another version of the story without having to worry about rights or copyright or any of those kind of things. So remake is kind of a loose term. It's just people all making the exact same story, right? And, you know, Gone with the Wind remake that went and won like Best Picture, you know. Wizard of Oz, I believe, also was a remake that won Best Picture. And what else? Godfather? No. Scarface is a remake, and that was like, you know, there's like a bunch of movies and stuff where sometimes you just forget the ones that existed. You know, you forget that there was like someone else had done it first, you know. And if we decide like what that, you know, that we can't redo something, then we are, you know, saying that then we are basically invalidating a lot of things that come from making. I mean, remake and reboot discussions have always been kind of a thing, you know?
Right.
They're telling the same story just in a different way. Right. And we've been discussing this before, whereas when we're talking about superheroes canon event, you know, like that's not always where we have had reboots and remakes.
Right. Now
we're talking about like what just straight, what are you pulling from the comics as the story keeps continuing? Like, what are you pulling from? Right. I find it interesting too, is like even Miles Morales, like we haven't technically had a movie version of the Miles Morales without the multiverse conversation. Right. You know? Yeah, it's like, so technically what is Miles's canon that you can, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, you can go through the comics and look at it. But in terms of this film, like they are again tackling with the fact that we're doing something completely just on its own as just a new thing. They're not really adapting the Miles Morales comic, because there's no way that the Miles Morales comic started off with, hey, here's a Gwen Stacy and a Peter Parker from a different universe, you know, coming in. So from the very beginning, it's completely changed and reversed. So that's a whole, again, more layers to the whole conversation. But yeah, just interesting. Fandom.
There's another little direction to go with this. It's going to start vague, and as soon as you have an idea, jump in. But we saw Past Lives yesterday, which also made me think about canon, because in the story, the guy, the first love, comes in and he's like, oh, I know you as this. I met you as this. I loved you as this. I remember you as this. And the girl is like, and and I'm different now. And I think that touching on what you said, almost like because we've gone through something, it's almost like you have to do it too. I said the other day, like people that get mad about possible student loan forgiveness because they had to pay off all of their debt. Like that's not an argument. Just because you experience something a certain way doesn't mean that now every other person that is in this similar situation has to experience it the exact same way you did. So there's like a little bit of almost control there, or like trying to relate things that don't need to be related. And I would like to talk about that in terms of like, why do we think that suffering like has to be intrinsic to development?
Yeah, there's the trauma aspect of the Canon Events specifically in the movie where they are pointing out, and this is something I think you hit on, but we didn't go into discussion, is they talk about the Ben dying, the Uncle Ben death, and then they talk about the Gwen Stacy death. And then for the Gwen Stacy's, there's also the Gwen's father death, right. I think, these are all deaths. These are all traumatic, dark events that we feel like, again, with the Batman story, like his whole thing, every version of Batman has to have like Martha and Thomas Wayne are dead, like get shot in front of him, like, right. How it changes and who did the shooting always changes. And in some versions, it's actually the Joker. And it's really, again, what are you allowed to change? What are you not allowed to change? But like, again, the things stay the same, right?
Right.
And yeah, it's in translating that to our lives, there is versions of, this is also something I want to bring up. It's like Miguel is the version of us that has gotten older, and is looking at these kids, these new Spider-Men, and specifically this very, very new one that is not a Peter Parker, the only one in its existence, and is rightfully so, shouldn't exist because he was made out of a whatever, right? And seeing that and backlashing against that as the older person, like we all know these people. Sometimes we are them,
right?
We are the person at work in your server job or whatever is like, I've been doing this for years. Like the new person comes in and tries to do something different. It's like, hold on, don't do that. I've learned some things. You're going to learn too. If you do this, this is going to backlash on you. You probably shouldn't do that. Like, just chill out, stop it with your new ideas kind of thing. And how we do that all the time. And we fit people in these boxes because we went through those things, What Boomer was created because because of that, because Generation Z was seeing that a lot of like, you're a boomer, like you're because you're saying we have to go through those things. I think about the housing market, right? And they're like, I could buy a house and I could do this and I could raise something, and like you should be able to do that. It's like, no, but you were making the equivalent of this much back then, and now we're making so much less. Like the equivalency is not the same.
Right.
Like you're not, like, yes, we're making more, but like when you actually adjust it and look at the cost of living, like you're not understanding. So we pass these down to our children. This is like, we talk a lot about generational trauma, and we force our kids to kind of go through the same things and to learn lessons, because like they have to figure it out for themselves or whatever. Right. And then we do it in our careers, in our lives, in our whatever. We talked about, I asked you about dancing, how this relates to the dance world. You went to a conservatory, you have a degree in dance, and you grew up doing dance. And I'm assuming you see this a lot in that world. Yeah,
just a very simple explanation. When I was a freshman, I had a jazz teacher that we had like boot camp style training where we would hold planks for like ridiculous amounts of time and we would run miles. And this is before you even start like dancing for the day. And I hated it. I cried a lot because it's like it's hard and you would be belittled if you weren't like performing to a certain, nobody cared if you were having a bad mental health day or if you were not cycle synced so your energy was low. It's like, it doesn't matter. We're holding a 5-minute plank and you're going to hold a 5-minute plank. And then I started teaching dance, and what did I make my kids do? I made them run before class. I made them hold planks. I told them to not like be a quitter when they would give up on things, because that's like the aggressive energy that I grew up dealing with. I like to think that in addition to that, I've partnered it with also a softer mentality of, you know, you're not a quitter, you're not a failure, but let's work to excellence. So how do you take the toxic things sometimes that are passed down to you and find, he wants his bone. How do you take the toxic thing and make it healthier? Right? Mm-hmm. Because the idea, again, is like working to your fullest capacity, understanding that your body is moving. It's not the other way around. So how do you find that control and that integrity without telling like 17-year-old kids that they're like stupid failures if they can't do
basically
something?
How do you change the cycle? Mm-hmm. Right? Because there's certain things in a dance world I think is like not changed in a long time. Mm-hmm. You know, how you view dance, how you like, and you talk about the ballerina world, like being this tough thing where you had to dance until your feet bleed, and you recall that kind of mentality in teachers.
And that
and
you
like,
almost like you wear that as a badge of honor. Like the more you suffer for your craft, the more like clout you have and the more you care. And that ties back to my point of why do we think that watching other people suffer is such an intrinsic part of growth? I'm not saying it isn't, but you know, there were a lot of people in my conservatory that didn't spend an extra 5 hours at night in the gym after all their dance classes trying to perfect something. And they are just as creative, talented, and capable as I am. Yeah. But because you're given this like oppressive idea of if you're not in pain and sore the next day, it was almost like a badge of honor when you would talk to your friends before bar of like, oh, well, like I'm dancing on a sprained ankle and yeah, I didn't eat yesterday and oh, my toe's broken and I had a performance on it. It's like, why are we all so proud of our suffering? And it's because from the level up, it's like you're almost taking it more seriously if you're suffering through it, which I think is toxic as shit. Yeah,
well, because someone somewhere down the line like made you feel proud for having like gone through it or something like that. There's this definitely is, I think, what Miguel is almost taking on, that toxic mentality of like, you have to be traumatized. You have to allow this in order to actually say that you are this thing. Yeah. You know, and how we do that a lot in our lives. I'm thinking a lot about the film industry and having been a PA, having been an AD, you know, and how we definitely have a, I guess, plethora of people who take pride in their like 12-hour, 16-hour days and getting something done, you know, and then other people that like, I don't know how they survive doing that kind of thing, you know, but we force people to go through these things all the time. We don't change wages. We don't change, you know, we're fighting right now in the Writers Guild of like, you can't just ask for more for less, you know, like you're not even giving us the equivalent of what we were getting before. And the simple idea is like, there are people at the top who believe that they got there through suffering, through hardship, put on your bootstrap, you know, pull up your bootstrap kind of mentality, that are making more, whereas we're making less, you know, they're not sharing it with everyone. Whereas like, that has never been a mentality that I've ever shared, that I can see where there's certain elements of that in my job where I've like, well, you know, why are you complaining? You know, because like we've done worse, you know. Right. I take pride in if I'm ADing or something, every time I can get us out of there and like on time. Right. You know? I take pride in being able to pay people equally, and only bringing people on to projects if I can get them a fair wage and things like that. But there are times where like if I've been in a certain environment where, especially like in the military, it's like, I understand, like, you got to go through boot camp just like everyone else, After that, there's usually like a drop off and being like, you did it. We all did it. There's like a very specific, like, this is the exact same thing that everyone goes through in order to be trained. And then we were like, okay, well, now you're here, you're part of the workforce. Like it changes dramatically, but you still feel like that people have to go through a certain amount of things. And I've definitely seen where I do the same thing,
Yeah.
and I probably will do that to my kids.
Right.
But why? But why should we have to allow, can they not learn from their own things, like, are we not traumatizing people enough?
Well, it might even come. So now I am thinking truly about like generational trauma and what we pick up from our parents. And, if you're talking about, oh, I'm upset that I have to get up so early for school. It's so early. And then your parents like, yeah, well, I had to get up early and I had to walk to school because we didn't have school buses.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, I think in a really fucked up way, it might be coming from a point of like wanting to get your skin thick so things aren't upsetting you, because like, oh, things can be worse. Things will get worse. And as you get older and you go through more things that can warp like your openness and your positivity toward the world, it just like it warps. And you look back and you're like, even me at 29, I'm like, I see where parts of me have died. Parts of my enthusiasm, parts of my like blind optimism are not as bright and colorful as they used to be when I was younger. And it's like, are older people with more knowledge almost trying to protect, like, if it's going to get bad, so like just prepare yourself.
Yeah.
And not that that's okay, but I think maybe that's why sometimes people are so adamant of like, oh, well, I did this and I did that and I got through it, because you don't like that. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel good when you came home and you told your mom that you had to walk home from the bus and they didn't care. But now you're just perpetuating that same thing to your kid.
Well, I think there's also a difference of like, when are we forcing them and when are they just needing to, quote unquote, like, get over it? Like, you do have to stop complaining about things that are technically like beyond our control.
Right.
If you have to get up early to go to school, it's like, I can't change that.
Right.
Like, you have to get up early to catch a bus to go to school. Like, there is I'm not forcing you to do that. That's just the system. And like, and if I can change it, I would, and there's a difference between making someone feel bad because like, or telling them like to suck it up. And, there can be, I think, room and different things. Here's what I say. I think the difference comes in when we talk about parenthood and talk about generational trauma and the showcasing of and how we bring this into our lives and pass it down to other people, whether it's children or new people or interns or whatever it is represented both in Peter B. Parker and Miguel O'Hara. And if that is a struggle with parenthood, and if these movies are about parenthood, and mentorship, you're seeing Peter B. Parker, who has a child and is like trying to do his best to raise this child in the best way possible and bringing her along and kind of, maybe put her in different situations, but like doesn't want her to like go through the same things that he did. And then Miguel, as a quote unquote parent, if you're looking at him in that sense, I was saying like, no, they have to go through this, and can't even stand having this child here because like, why are you what I'm saying? Like she can't be here. She's not part of the society, that kind of stuff. And that's like clearly represented in like, how do we act, react, or I guess resolve those when those things happen, or our children are coming up, and those are the two different parenting styles. One tells them to like suck it up and like no, and then also is forcing it and another one who's like trying, it's easy to be like saying like it's not like a weaker path, but it's a nicer, kinder kind of path about it, and allowing the child to just be and not forcing certain events upon this child just because he had to go through them.
Right. Because we say like hurt people.
Yeah.
Which I think is very valid. Like angry people, anger is covering a soft emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you've been hurt and that's the way you protect yourself. So that's why I think, again, like even though Miguel is an antagonist to Miles Morales, he is not a bad person. He's just reacting under the confines of like what he's been through, which you can't fault him for. But I think that's why it's important what we said of like breaking the pattern, and then what can you actually like change, you know? And
like,
even if you can't change it, Miles hasn't
I'm trying to emphasize your point. Like Miles hasn't had the event happen yet.
Mm-hmm.
Miguel's trying to force it on him. Like your father has to die, and you can't change that, as opposed to the difference, which would be like, this has already happened. He's not telling, like, Miguel could be, well, suck it up and like continue going on. Like we all had to go through this, which is kind of a mentality or whatever. But not only that, he's like forcing Miles to go through this event that hasn't actually happened yet. And I think that's important. Like how you, like, as you said, breaking that cycle, because like it's the difference between has it happened and what is their reaction to it, and like where are you forcing that? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we can, because that is like, there are certain things that I think we do sometimes have to, that are just part of the job, or part of like being in a specific career or whatever, that you kind of have to accept, and it's going to be hurtful, and like, I want to be there for you kind of thing, like when you were playing The Last of Us, and there again, it's how we react to it, right? You get to a certain part and you're like, I hate this, I don't want to play anymore, and it's like a traumatic experience. This is just a very small example, and I could be there and be like, no, pick up the controller, like suck it up, like we all had to go through this, which is true. It's a video game, we all have to get through this part of the story, as opposed to allowing you to actually experience this for yourself. That's just I guess a basic example of that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes we can't break the cycle. We can't change it. Like in the form of a video game, it's like, well, how do we engage with it?
Yeah.
How do we like learn from it? How do we, look up to the people who have gone through these things and ask them, like, how did you get through this? And how do you, as that person who's gone through it before, engage with that person who's now going through it?
Yeah.
This is actually one of my favorite themes in storytelling, and it always, to me, gets simplified by this line in a song that I always come back to as one of my favorite songs. And it's kind of I don't know exactly, I haven't like analyzed the song, but in it, he could be talking to himself, or he could be talking to another person. And the line goes, I remember when I used to be you before you became me, and there's this idea of like, in that, where I can see when I was coming up in the industry, and one of the very first experiences I had was doing a scene with an older guy, and I was so excited to be on set. I was so excited to be doing this like student film, which was probably not very good, but it was my very first time kind of doing these things. and going and having like a little smoke break with him. And he's like, he literally told me, it's like, it's not who you know, it's who you blow. Like, it's very much like jaded, very specific, like kind of was doing this to do it because he was getting some experience, but not really caring about it anymore. He had already done the LA thing, came back to Texas. This is where we're filming it. You know what I'm saying? And like how easy it is for me to then become that person, and to see how we create that same version of ourselves.
Well, yeah, because like I was saying, if hurt people hurt people,
yeah,
and we are clearly also products of our environment, if we're constantly around jaded people, hurt people, people who are saying that we have to go through like shitty things and just deal with it because that's how the world is, then of course we're going to wear that vest like it's our own. So it's really important to see like, okay, that person's probably jaded because you grew up with huge dreams of like creating and exploring. And then you went to LA and it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. And you didn't hit the success that you wanted. And now you're back in Texas doing this student film with this brand new bright-eyed kid that reminds you of what you were before that was like killed in you. And it's the choice to actually be able to look at yourself and say like, I understand what these big emotions are, and I do not need to inflict suffering on other people because of like my own unhappiness or things that are unresolved in me. And how great would it be if we were all like healthy and capable enough to do that constantly, because then we can cultivate generations and generations of people who are able to just perpetuate that. So now you have big dreams. You moved to LA and you're trying and you're doing the best you can. You're making new connections. You're getting onto set. You're working with Corridor. Like you're doing all these things. And that's great that you were able to like keep that part of you alive, because if you would have been around more people like that jaded actor, or if more people would have put that on you and you started to wear that jaded, like, I'm never going to succeed. I'm never going to be able to do it. It's just suffering. And it's, I'm not rich enough and I don't know enough people. Then you just perpetuate that cycle. So it's nice to see in you and in us, I hope in our generation, that we're starting to make the choice of, yeah, shitty things can happen to us and we don't need to perpetuate the shittiness. So other people have to be like, we don't have to bring people down with us. Mm-hmm. I just think that's important. We do that with moods too. Like when you're in a bad mood, it's like you almost want someone to commiserate with. Mm-hmm. You misery loves company. And it's like, well, we can't do that because we're forcing generations and generations and generations of people to just like sink into the mud. And I think again with Miles, it's a different concept, but it's also the same concept of, I can forge a different path than you. And I respect your experience, Miguel. And we can't say that Miguel doesn't know what he's talking about, because he does. He experienced his own Canon events and trying to push back against it. But ultimately, like, what do you allow people to do with the knowledge you wish you had, but without all the baggage that you now have with it?
Mm-hmm. There's we know this concept of respect your elders from the Bible. And I also love when Jesus tells those same elders at times, or like, look at this child, if only anyone could approach the kingdom of heaven with like this child, because of, and there's other scriptures too that talk about like how the youth, we should look to them more for wisdom than we don't, And that is like the balance, right? There's the balance of these people are wise and have gone through certain things, and we should, all our mentors in media, the hero's journey requires a mentor, like to teach a person of older age, usually, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Gandalf, Dumbledore. Did I say sexy Gandalf before when I was talking about Harry Potter? Because now I feel like I did.
No, I think you said sexy gay Dumbledore.
You know what I'm saying. Anyway, the point is, someone's going to get mad at me and they're not going to get this far in the podcast. If I accidentally said that, I'm so sorry. Anyway, the old mentor, teaching like the young person, but then we forget that the young person needs to bring new ideas, needs to bring something new. Because like if we don't we don't have that, we don't change society, that the person is often the main character, and we hate it. Like, I hate myself. I'm an old person at this point. Like, I'm not old. I'm like 36, but like I am get off my lawn. Like, I don't want another young person taking my spot, kind of situation, especially in the industry that I'm in. Like, I get it. There's certain areas where like I suck at this, kids nowadays grew up. I don't know if their parents bought it for them or whatever. They got to get a hold of like After Effects and whatever, whereas I was struggling just to figure out like how to get a computer that can connect to the internet at that age. Like how much more would I know, if and how much more could I do if I had the opportunity? And it sucks. I feel like that person. I feel like that person like just get off my lawn when there's some validation in terms of, I didn't have as much opportunity as they did. I had to like struggle and get through, and I don't know as much. But there's also the fact is like it's a different time.
Yeah.
Like, how much do I need to keep up? And how much is it that like I just know what I know? Can't teach an old dog new tricks, and it is such a struggle to recognize that like the people that are coming under us, I should say, are sometimes better at the thing. They're implementing new stuff and they're able to adapt a lot quicker. You used to be like that, but you can't do it anymore.
Right. Well, that really just made me think of like jealousy too. I notice when I generally experience jealousy, like I'm a little bitchier and I'm a little shorter and I'm a little more like persnickety. And so I'm 29, and as a dancer, my body does not do the things that it did when I was a freshman in college.
Sure.
To the same capacity. If I was to do like an 8-hour day of dancing at my age now, there would need to be like ample warm-up time. I would need like really particular meals at certain times to keep my energy high, to make my recovery good. I would need to be active with recovery. When I was in college, I was waking up at 4 a.m., going to Dunkin' Donuts for 3 hours, doing a 10-hour dance day with a 2-hour rehearsal, and then going to bed to get up like and do it all over again. No recovery, no like eating an apple if I had time. So it's different. And now I look back at kids now who are like 16, 17, and they can do like 10 pirouettes in a row, and I still fall out of like triples, and we have like ridiculous oversplits. And I remember getting to the point where I had all 3 of my splits. Like, these kids are coming up, and it's because they have the knowledge of people like me who are now like, okay, well, if I'm going to teach, what do I need to know? If I would have been more flexible, maybe this, and this. So now we start training these things younger and younger. So these people have more skills than I had at that age. And I'm also wondering if there is a little bit of that, like, again, like jealousy and what if, like, oh, well, what if I had access to a computer like this kid did? Where would my skills be now? And if I would have been working pirouettes the way that this 9-year-old was when I was 9, where would I be now? Would it play any bit of a difference? So, and again, I think that pairs with the misery loves company of, if you can't handle that big emotion in you and that fear of like maybe not reaching the bar and not being able to fulfill your full potential, do you use that energy to help other people and make your industry better? Or do you use that to like sour the energy around you?
Yeah.
I have one more quick comment. You mentioned like how the youth seem to be kind of aware of the youth. I know, 29, but the youth, like, I'm not part of the youth anymore. The younger people are noticing Canon events that older generations are going through.
Yeah, Zoomer versus Boomer kind of.
And I just saw on TikTok, I was scrolling while Mattias was setting up, and I came across like 3 or 4 trending videos of, it's like, oh, bi girl in her 30s dates her 4th like gamer boyfriend that she has to mother. Can't interfere. It's a Canon event.
Yeah.
And it's a younger person. It's like a 17-year-old girl making this. So it's like this younger generation is seeing. It's like, oh, there are like
from
patterns.
The movie. They're using the movie terms.
The sound clip. Yeah.
Oh,
but calling out like Canon events that we do go through. I'm trying to think of like something else, or like woman with a mother wound finds partner who like she never feels like lives up to his expectations. It's a canon event. You can't change it.
Sure.
So it's like this movie is even infiltrating just like day-to-day life where we see it in ourselves. These are events that certain types of people go through and we all kind of share it, which I think is really unique. And again, just the fact that I swear she was like 16 years old. She looked really young and she was like, by women in their 30s. I was like, how do you already have this opinion? Like how do you know this? And it's because I really do think the younger generation has like a critical eye and they can see the patterns that their predecessors are falling into and they don't want to be a part of it.
Or we've always had it, but now in this internet age, we're just able to recognize it more.
Yeah.
You know, like in that way, it's what are we've given people more opportunities to be able to notice these things, I guess. I can't remember where I heard it recently, but someone said it's not about like don't worry about the world record because your record's always going to be broken. It's going to be broken someday. It's the fact that it's just having done it is what you should care about. It's just the fact that you've done it, right? I think about like we love Formula One and Lewis Hamilton is 8 world record titles, you know? I said it. And he, you know, in today's age, people will disregard those world records because of like, well, he's in faster cars. Like we're doing more races now, you know, like all those kind of things. And the more and more records he's broken every single record, you know, and someday someone might come along and beat all of his records and it's going to be fairly easy whenever, you know, how many race wins do you have in a season? Well, that's going to change when we start adding 30 races a season versus what it was before, like maybe 10 or something, you know, like, yeah. So people are easily, there are things like that are easily going to be broken. Right. But it's not the fact that he's broken every single record and that someone else will never be able to do it. You know, it's not about he's not the GOAT because of that. It's because of who he is and the person he is in the sport to have overcome all the things that he's done to break those things. That's kind of a tangent about the fact that like it's, you know, you can chase records, you can chase these certain things, but like you shouldn't, someone else is going to come along. They're going to have more opportunity than you. They're going to come along. They're going to have better resources that you didn't have. And it's, you know, maybe we're not talking about records. We're just talking about like, you know, just success in general, you know, how do we view these things and view them as something of just having gotten to do it? You know, how do we stop looking at the what ifs and, well, I could do that, you know, or all that kind of stuff and not just kind of collaborating with our younger versions, you know, or our, what in a way that is just being like, well, what are we doing together? You know, how do we like, what are the things that I accomplished that allowed someone to do this thing? You know, if it wasn't for me, like you know, forging that path, you know, it's a constant cycle, you know, like, yeah, like no one we could go back in history of like certain things that people just weren't allowed to do, but that doesn't make them any less successful or the story any less worth telling, you know,
right.
or having lived. It's not a life not worth living.
Right.
You know, and I think that's what we do to ourselves when we talk about this quote unquote canon event or say like this has to happen, you know?
Yeah.
But bringing up those TikTok things might help transition to the last thing that I kind of wanted to bring up in that sense is like not just what are we passing down, but what are we holding on to, right? What canon events have defined our lives that we are continuing to believe these things about ourselves that we do not get past, that we no longer we believe that this is the thing that made me and I am this person, you know, and I am what I am because of what it is, you know, and I can no longer change who I am or change my trajectory or change my life, because of that thing. What are we holding on to that's holding it? Go ahead.
Naturally, that's going to bring me back to The Last of Us. We see a character like Joel who experiences trauma and for years thinks that's who he is. And then he meets Ellie. And I was taking an acting class when I first moved here, and just the idea of like actually letting yourself be affected by things and people. We do limit ourselves based on what's happened to us. I think it's because it makes us comfortable. We as humans like to define and like kind of know where we fit into the puzzle pieces. And, if I'm Joel and it's like, I get shit done. I'm not very emotional. Like, this is my place in the world. And if you are met with information that doesn't quite fit with that, you're going to push it away. So
there's a dog in the foreground of the shot just because she's on the couch.
Put those ears down. Come on. And there's another dog. So I think you're right. It is like, what do we hold on to, and how do we decide what our story is, and when do we get so
blocking the entire
oh my God.
thing.
Honestly, I need to pee anyway, but when do we get so persnickety that we stop writing our story? When does something big enough happen to you that you decide that's it, and now this is who I am? For Miguel, it seems like he experienced that already. And now he is the version that he is, and he's going to lean into it as hard as possible. And if he would just let himself be affected by Miles. So you could have the knowledge without the baggage. If you could go back, all those silly memes that are like, would you take $6 million right now, or would you go back to being a 12-year-old but have all the knowledge that you have currently? If you're the kind of person that would pick that, it's the theory of knowledge without baggage. So I think, yeah, as we age, we just get to a point where we're comfortable and we stop like being active participants in our story, where like the things that were going to happen to us have happened to us, and now there's nothing to be done about it. Whereas kids are constantly like rewriting their narrative and constantly rediscovering themselves. You even said when you were younger, you would push back against like whatever the norm was. And I still see some of that in you, even now at 36, which I think is special. But we do see as people age, it's like, oh, well, nope, this is just who I am. This is what I like. And I'm not saying that there's no merit to that. But again, like you have to be an active participant in your story. You can't just be a victim to the canon events that have happened to you, because then that almost takes away like your agency. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think Miguel, I think the reason he goes so hard on Miles, and we talked a little bit about this, is the fact that he is essentially fighting with himself, right? In terms of like, are not allowed to change these things. Again, we talk about how we put this on the other generation, what they're allowed to do because we can't do it, But in essence, he's like, he is saying these things to himself, You said hurt people. Like the struggle that Miguel is having is the fact that he believes like he shouldn't exist, He believes he shouldn't be here, like he doesn't matter, And there's a part of him who has taken on a certain responsibility and believes that like, no, I am this way because of the things that I've gone through, and it is my job and my goal to do those things, and I cannot deviate because this is who I am now. This is what I've told myself. This is to a certain extent a correct way of looking at things. To like, yeah, like if you like that is, if you're taking on, I guess, an agenda or a passion, things that you're like, this is who I am, that there are good parts about this, right? I am, I cannot, when I was wanting to be an actor, I was like, I can't think of anything else, like this is just in me. This is my inherent, like who I am. Like you can't tell me to change because like I can't change, right? But I don't have to be a quote unquote bad actor, a jaded actor. I don't have to be an actor who is more important than, you know what I'm saying? Like, so it's like, there is the good and bad of it, you know? Whereas Miguel has so hardened his heart and forced himself into this mold, into this box that he created himself in, that he is struggling to get out of, you know? We say this, we talk a lot about the fact that like I'm older, you're younger. You see me as like the old man, and there are the things that, for lack of a better phrase, you tell me to go to therapy a lot.
Everyone can benefit from therapy.
Yeah, we don't actually tell.
Yeah, we don't.
we don't say it in that way, but that's just the way that I'm using it. It's like, yeah, we talk about therapy and things, and there are definitely things that I've recognized, and like when you go to 12 steps, the things that keep coming up, the specific phrases that come up are getting over your hurts, your hangups, and your habits, right? When we go through specific Canon events, and especially in like therapy, we learn, and in 12 steps in therapy or whatever, even we were watching couples therapy, how much of it comes back to your parents. And so you learn very quickly, if you're paying attention, it doesn't matter how good or bad your parents are, you're going to be traumatized, right? So we go through these certain Canon events as children that have created in us things that we just do not recognize as things that we've taken on, like personality traits that we've taken on. Like we're not conscious to these facts. You know, these are our hurts, these are our hangups, these are our habits. We've created habits around these, right? When I choose to continually react the same way about something, you know, or let anger become be the first response to things, you know, that's a habit that was born out of some justifiable response of survival or whatever it is, in order, I don't know what it was, right? You know, but you could use therapy to figure it out. You know, of having to, I don't know, defend myself or whatever it is, right? And that's good. But when you rely on that and you continually return to that as a crutch, you know, that then it becomes bad, you know, then it becomes toxic, then it becomes like unchanging and unhealthy for you as a person, you know? And I think that's where Miguel is at that stage, is like, he's got these hangups that are defining who he is, that he's struggling with, and he can't seem to change. We all kind of go through that, where if you are doing work on yourself, or if you are continually confronting certain versions of yourself, I think people can recognize this thought process of, I want to change, but I can't seem to change. Why can't I change? Like, what is holding me back from being you know, and whether it's talking to a friend or a partner or yourself, and saying, what is it about me that is unable to stop doing the same thing that I'm doing, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's the Canon events, you know, that have done this.
Yeah.
And everyone has those. And again, everyone, I hate to say that in general that we're all fucked up, but we all, as you said, could benefit from therapy, you know? We all could do a little bit of work to overcome those Canon events. And that's not to say some people have looked at those things and they believe that they are who they are and they accept it, and and maybe they're not toxic, but then it still becomes a thing that they haven't dealt with. You know what I'm saying? We all have canon events of our lives that you need to confront and, I think, figure out how you engage with that. You know, who are you because of it? And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I don't know how we define what's good and bad, you know? Sometimes it just is who you are. But like, if you do feel like there are certain things that are holding you back, if you do have a hurt there, then I think that that tells you that it's something that needs to change, and you can change.
Right.
There's just there's ways that you have to do it, you know?
I think, especially if we look at canon events more under the umbrella of, I've never thought of a word in my life, instead of good or bad, just like it like shakes up something in you, that it changes the flow of what you were doing.
Because it's not always traumatic, right?
Right.
And some of the things that have created in us could be good things, you know? Like if something, we watch couples therapy on Showtime or Amazon, whatever it was, right? And there's certain things that have happened that have created a diligent, thoughtful human being because their parents weren't like that, you know, or something like that, right? And how they approach relationships can be good, can be seen as good traits, you know, and even out of trauma, if it is, or even out of, you know, so it's interesting to look at those things. But I think that we're trying to clearly define, like, what are the things that are causing other people hurt, you know? What are the things that are things that you feel like are not conducive to, like, who you actually are, right?
Right.
To who you feel like you are, that are not aligning with, like, what you represent, you know?
Yeah, I finally remembered, if your canon event shakes up, like, your sense of self and your sense of security, then like, if you get mad, if, like, anger is something that you go to, it's because, like, maybe you didn't feel that you were heard or taken seriously or respected unless you were being so loud and, like, adamant and vocal about it, that, like, this need was not being met. And it served you well once, maybe as a child, and then it just multiplies and multiplies. It's like, okay, this worked, this kept me safe. Instead of feeling like sad and abandoned, it, like, had my need met when I acted this way. So even our, like, most of the time, I think even our toxic traits to other people are born out of just trying to protect self, because we don't ever want to feel, like, small or abandoned or not taken seriously. And I think it's difficult for a lot of people to look at those feelings objectively. And I think age also plays into that, because as you go through more experience that leave you hurt or jaded or kind of, like, put off, you're going to fall into this pattern of, well, how do I protect myself? Because this shit just keeps happening. Whereas when you're a kid, it's like, you fall in love, you get your heart broken, you sob in the back of a car because you, like, didn't get cast in the role you want. Like, you experience your emotions to such a wide, like, unboxed level, because nothing has happened to you to put you into those boxes yet. But then adults look at you and they're like, oh, okay, well, like, you're overreacting, you're doing this, it's not that serious. And it's like, but don't you wish you still had that energy? Because then you could continue to rewrite your story. And instead of always lying because you're afraid of conflict, or getting mad, or people pleasing because you, like, don't feel comfortable standing up for yourself, you could actually look objectively at the soft feeling there and honor that, instead of being so afraid that everything is just going to, like, attack you. And just tying it back to Spider-Man, because I am very excited about the next movie, I really hope that that's what we see from Miguel as an antagonist instead of as a villain, of how do you let this more unbaggaged energy impact you and cultivate positive change in your life. If Miles Morales is someone that can come in and encourage you to accept change and remember what it meant to be soft, and that Peter B. Parker can come in with Mayday and remind you what it felt like to be a father and have you not be afraid of that and feel like you have to put up walls and put up this aggression to protect yourself, I think that will also be a really fun journey to take with him if that's what comes from it. Obviously, I don't know what's going to happen, but just
two things I want to say. One, we're not therapists, so don't take anything that she said as therapy advice in terms of your anger or what you think is what some things that you said there could easily be that's a very specific thing.
Yeah, I'm not a therapist. If you didn't know, I'm not a therapist.
Don't analyze yourself from this, There's enough people self-diagnosing themselves from like whatever.
But also look at yourself with a critical lens if you want. I just, do what you gotta do.
The second thing I want to say is I love what you said about self-preservation and the idea of this, how this is always born out of like us trying to protect our younger selves and remembering our younger selves. And I love that because that's the exact same thing that Miles's mom says to him. Like, I can't protect that little boy anymore. You have to remember that little boy. You have to remember that as you're going through your life and you're exploring the world, that little boy exists and you have to protect him for me. Mm-hmm. And don't let anyone tell that little boy like that, and all those kinds of things. And that's exactly what so I think that is something that is clearly going to be tackled in the next movie. And like, who is that little boy in Miguel? Mm-hmm. Who's like, and remembering that that we are all somewhat like children inside, mm-hmm. struggling children. And mm-hmm. the more toxic we become, the more jaded we become, the more we let these traumatic things kind of become our identity. The older we get, we're just forgetting to protect that child. Mm-hmm. We're forgetting to look at that child and to give them forgiveness or give them leeway, mm-hmm. Or a chance to become something different. I imagine like even the people who feel the most stuck, I don't want to say that it's their fault because of the specific things that I'm thinking about, but it is in essence like, in order to get unstuck is as you said, to remember that we may have done this out of self-preservation to survive, and we may have done this in order to protect that child in the first place, mm-hmm. But we have also gotten stuck because we've forgotten mm-hmm. that. That we are not recognizing that child, and we're not doing it. We're not recognizing it in other people.
Right. It's almost like as we get older and we gather more knowledge, like we get to parent ourselves with the energy that we need. So you have like the young version of you that has the reactionary. It's the jealousy, it's the anger, it's the sad, it's the scared. And then the you that has more knowledge has to come in and give it a safe space to be like, okay, of course you're allowed to feel this way. And now how do we make that productive? I'm not going to tell you it's stupid you feel that way. Feel your feeling. But then how do we navigate from there, since we are more knowledgeable, more forward thinking? And I do like that. I do like that idea that we have the power to constantly be rewriting who we are and how we engage with other people. And sometimes if we're not able to do that in ourselves because we're so comfortable with the jacket that we've put on, it does take another person, meeting another person, seeing their energy, or having your two littles not always connect. And then as adults being like, and here's how we move forward. Here's how we better ourselves. And here's how we cultivate a safe space. So hopefully, we're giving the younger generation the tools that they need to also do this better than we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A whole lot of things, I guess, to think about with this film, and I guess some of the things that we've been tackling and struggling with and kind of mulling over ever since we saw Across the Spider-Verse. And so yeah, I feel like there's so much more we could say in having these discussions. That's like not just, I think having just the discussion is good. I think that's what's great about this film is the fact that like you can look at it and interpret in any of these ways, whether it's like as a parent, as a older person, jaded person, or, you know, and as a young person trying to make their way in the world among, you know, how to navigate these quote unquote canon events, which has nothing to do with superhero stuff, you know? So yeah, I feel like we have to end it there only because like we could keep going around, and also like we've gone beyond the scope
I'm
of
with
the,
you.
of the
I'm with
thing.
you.
Because I had some things to say. I was like, but we don't. Maybe it's like it's ongoing discussions for like other times, I think. But yeah.
Well, now I want to know.
No, I've forgotten it.
Oh,
like
okay.
I don't know. I think it can keep going and going.
You're right.
But I think we've hit what we need to hit. So yeah. I hope you guys have enjoyed this different format, this different thing. If statistics are to be believed, if our normal movie discussion, you know, gets listened to less, I'm sure this one will get listened to far less than the other ones. But those who do find it, I hope you did get something out of it. This is just us just trying to have a discussion and just to talk about it, and just to because I felt like it was worth jumping into, because again, we've got so much out of this movie, and we can keep getting more and more. And I think it's worth having these conversations, especially on a podcast called Codependent Content.
Yeah, for sure.
Where we're often talking about feelings and things, because it's always worth looking at our content, figuring out what it's trying to tell us, and how we can be affected by it, changed by it, or how we can engage it and bring it into our own lives, you know? And especially when something that's like can be so formulaic on the surface really is tackling so many deeper things that you just might not recognize, you know?
Right.
And I love having those deep dive discussions. And I think that to me is what codependent content is and should be about, you know, constantly trying to engage with the things we love and hopefully come out better, see what it's saying about humanity and come out better at the end, you know? Yeah. So yeah, if you enjoyed this discussion, feel free to comment. If there's things you also got out of it, feel free to comment. I won't say things that we missed, because there's definitely things we missed, but like, it's not really about that. It's just about like what else is there, you know?
Yeah.
What else do you feel like we can learn from having watched the movie, things like that? Because I think there's going to be think pieces, there's going to be more stuff, and feel free to point us in those directions too, because I love
for sure
reading those things. Go read my article as well if you're interested in that at all. Go to the Discord if you have your own thoughts and write up your own think piece, you know, because I think it's great. I think building a little community that's continually like having these conversations is great. So go to the Discord, go to YouTube, make a comment, do whatever. And we will see you in less than a week as we watch Star Trek Strange New World Season 2. And hopefully enjoy a journey in the final frontier. Space. Prosper, live. Something.
Just cut it.
Greetings.
Get...